because my next guest just testified before a federal grand jury. He says he was in possession of a trove of digital evidence from Diddy's freak-offs and parties.
Today, in a New York federal courtroom, Sean Diddy Combs told the judge he was, quote, a little nervous. The rap mogul's criminal trial began this morning. He is trafficking, racketeering, and more.
The courtroom was electric, crackling with energy that could only come from the convergence of celebrity scandal and the promise of a jaw-dropping trial. Sean Diddy Combs, once the untouchable king of hip-hop and a cultural powerhouse, now sat at the center of the storm, gone with a designer suits and air of invincibility. In their place was a man visibly burdened by the weight of accusations that could obliterate his career, his fortune, and his legacy. The charges against him weren't just allegations. They were a wrecking ball aimed squarely at everything he had spent decades building.
Always feels like that, especially before federal trials, because you get to read the indictment. You have all the, not all, but you have much of what the prosecution is going to be.
But there's something additional.
Of their strategy.
There's something additional here. You're right that they hear about all of that. But what they're also hearing is these other lawsuits that have been filed by all these civil law firms.
The accusations read like something out of a dark, twisted screenplay. Prosecutors painted a picture of a man who, behind the polished facade of a music mogul, orchestrated a shadowy world of power plays. And control. The indictment wasn't just about money, fame, or even reckless behavior. It was about the alleged abuse of power. In its most grotesque form, the courtroom buzzed with whispers as the details of these shocking claims came to light. Combs, according to the indictment, allegedly manipulated his influence to coerce others into participating in indulgent, extravagant encounters that prosecutors described as both orchestrated and exploitative. And if that wasn't enough to grab headlines, the evidence backing these allegations was just as incendiary. Surveillance footage alone was enough to send shock waves through the public consciousness. Leaked last year, the video showed what appeared to be Combs in a hotel hallway as actions toward his then partner Cassie Ventura caught on tape. In horrifying clarity, that footage had been analyzed, dissected, and debated endlessly across social media and news outlets. The rawness of the undeniable visuals left little room for interpretation, and now it was confirmed the jury would see that footage unfiltered as part of the trial. For Combs' defense team, this was a nightmare scenario. For prosecutors, it was a silver bullet, a visceral, undeniable moment that could anchor their entire case. And for the public, it was a kind of scandal that demanded attention, feeding an insatiable hunger for drama, justice, or perhaps just the thrill of watching a once untouchable figure brought to his knees.
You're hearing about all these videos with celebrities, not going to be part of the criminal case. And
Cassie video.
The Cassie video is going to be part. Right. We're going to get to that in a minute with the jury. But what we did was, number one, we showed them the prosecution's case from one of our documentaries. And then we showed them the defense from the current documentary.
But the video was just the tip of the iceberg. Prosecutors had dug deep into K's life, unearthing a treasure trove of evidence that painted a damning picture. Raids on his properties earlier in the year uncovered items that prosecutors claimed were used in these alleged escapades, items that, while ordinary on their own, took on a sinister weight when paired with the accusations. The narrative being woven by the prosecution was one of meticulous planning and a lifestyle that blurred the lines between personal indulgence and something far darker. And while Call's legal team fought tooth and nail to keep much of this evidence out of the courtroom, Judge Barun's Submanian's ruling signaled that little would remain hidden.
There's been no profit motive involved at all. The last word is profit.
He's already rich.
So whether or not he had the freak-offs or he did whatever.
Follow the money.
Well, there is no money to follow. I mean, the freak-offs aren't okay, the way in which I read it, it's not an illegal business. A freak-off.
Yet for all the prosecution's confidence, Combs wasn't going down without a fight. His defense team had crafted a strategy that was as audacious as it was risky. They weren't denying the lifestyle, far from it. Instead, they leaned into it, arguing that what others might see as excess or debauchery was in fact consensual, and Private Combs wasn't a criminal. They argued he was simply a man living life on his own terms, albeit in ways that might make some uncomfortable. They framed him as a larger-than-life figure whose actions have been misunderstood, exaggerated, or outright fabricated by those looking for a payday or revenge. It was a bold move, one that relied on humanizing a man who had long been larger than life.
I think one thing that I haven't heard said at this table yet is bribery. So he probably promised a lot of these people either fame, fortune, riches. Whether or not he delivered, I doubt it. But that's another matter entirely, right? So that's obviously, if he incentivized some of these people in order to participate in all of these things, that wouldn't surprise me at all. Is that a definition, or does that fit a definition of coercion in any way?
And humanizing him was no small task. Combs' public image, once defined by his swagger, success, and charm, had taken a beating in recent months. The stories emerging from those who once orbited his world painted a picture of a man who thrived on control of his empire's relationships and those around him, but his defense team knew that juries don't convict based on personality flaws. They needed to dismantle the prosecutions. Narrative piece by piece, casting doubt on every witness and every piece of evidence they needed to show that Combs wasn't the mastermind of some grand scheme, but a man whose private life had been dragged into the spotlight and twisted beyond recognition. Jury selection, typically a dry procedural affair, had turned into a spectacle in its own right. The potential jurors were grilled not only about their biases, but about their familiarity with the entertainment industry, their openness to alternative lifestyles, and even their opinions on the hip-hop genre. The courtroom became a microcosm of societal divisions, with prosecutors and defense attorneys sparring over who could be truly impartial in a case already saturated with media coverage. Every juror dismissed felt like a small victory or loss, depending on which side you asked.
Two women who said that they had been abused, saying it happened decades ago, and they thought that they could look at the evidence in this case, which is about assault, and view it fair and unbiased based on what comes into the courtroom. And one woman who is proceeding said she was arrested when she was 16 for shoplifting at Harry Potter's World at Universal Studios. The judge asked her what she stole. She said it was a wand.
And then there was a plea deal, the tantalizing offer that prosecutors had dangled in front of Combs just days before the trial began. The specifics of the deal were never made public, but sources close to the case suggested it would have spared him the possibility of a life sentence. Yet Combs had rejected it outright. Whether it was confidence in his defense or refusal to admit guilt or sheer hubris was anyone's guess. What was clear, though, was that this decision raised the stakes to an almost unbearable degree. If convicted, Combs wouldn't just lose his freedom. He'd lose everything. The courtroom was packed not just with reporters, but with curious spectators, some of whom had camped out overnight for a chance to witness the opening salvos of what promised to be one of the most explosive trials in recent memory. The judge's decision to allow Combs to wear his own clothes in court, a seemingly minor detail, only added to the drama. Every sartorial choice, every gesture, every glance would be scrutinized, dissected, and analyzed for better or worse. Combs was on stage, and the world
is hopeful that that could be concluded as soon as Wednesday, with opening statements in the case beginning next week, and then the beginning of the evidence. So Combs has pleaded not guilty. He has said, his lawyers have said, that all of these allegations are the prosecutors trying to criminalize his sexual activity that they say was entirely consensual.
As the trial loomed, the public's reactions were as divided as they were intense. Some saw Combs as a victim of a justice system eager to make an example, a high-profile figure. Others saw him as the embodiment of unchecked privilege and power. Finally held to account, social media was awash with debates, hashtags, and armchair analyses, with everyone from casual fans to industry insiders weighing in celebrities who had once been close to Combs remained conspicuously silent, their absence speaking volumes. The prosecution strategy was clear. They wanted to strip away the glitz and glamour, exposing a man who, in their words, uses influence to manipulate and harm the defense. Meanwhile, was banking on the idea that jurors would see Holmes not as a villain, but as a flawed, complicated individual. It was a battle not just for a verdict, but for the narrative itself.
Absolutely not surprising, because they want to get to a fair and impartial jury, and someone who has already formed an opinion, for example, is not going to be someone that the defense is going to want to move forward with, because you are supposed to listen to what the judge says in the four corners of.
And as the courtroom settled into an uneasy silence on the first day of testimony, one thing was clear: this trial wasn't just about Sean Diddy Combs. It was about power, influence, and the lengths people would go to hold on to both. It was about secrets dragged into the light and the fallout that comes when the walls of celebrity come crashing down. And while the legal battle was just beginning, the ripple effects of this case were already being felt far beyond the courtroom walls. And just like that, The courtroom wasn't the only place where the chaos was unraveling. While Shad Combs sat under the harsh lights of federal scrutiny, rumors began swirling outside the courthouse walls. Rumors that sent shockwaves through his inner circle associates, employees, even once loyal allies were reportedly in a state of sheer panic. The whispers weren't just about guilt or innocence anymore. They were about survival, who could be implicated, and worst of all, who might be next.
Because we now know who all the prosecutors will be on Diddy's trial. They're all women. They have assembled a team of female prosecutors, and that is definitely not by accident.
Behind the scenes, the walls were closing in on more than just Combs. The indictment had hinted at something much larger, a sprawling network that allegedly enabled the behavior for years. The prosecution wasn't just building a case against one man, they were peeling back the layers of an empire. And for those who have been part of his orbit, from business partners to personal confidants, the fear was palpable. Sources close to the investigation suggested that subpoenas were flying fast and furious. Former employees were reportedly being questioned, some willingly, others not so much. The possibility of additional arrests loomed large, and the tension was unbearable. It wasn't hard to see why the allegations themselves painted a picture of a tightly controlled operation, where loyalty wasn't just expected, it was demanded. Combs had built a career on the idea of family, a close-knit group of collaborators who rose together in the glitzy world of hip-hop. But now that same loyalty could become a double-edged sword. Prosecutors were allegedly leveraging every tool they had, offering deals to anyone willing to provide dirt on their former boss. And the pressure was working. Insiders started to crack, spilling stories that only deepened the mystery and added fuel to the fire.
Now, I suppose it could be coincidence. I don't think it's coincidence, and especially given the nature of the case.
Yes.
Because when you look at who is examining these various witnesses, especially female alleged victims, of which there will be 4.
One former associate, speaking anonymously to a tabloid, claimed that Calls had an inner sanctum of trusted individuals who managed everything from his professional deals to his personal life. If you were in, you were in for life, the source said, but if you cross him even once, you were done. This intense loyalty reportedly extended to covering up his more questionable activities. Some insiders hinted at non-disclosure agreements. So ironclad, they might as well have been signed in blood. Others claimed they had been paid handsomely to look the other way. But now, with the feds breathing down their necks, loyalty was starting to waver. And then there were the names, the ones whispered in hushed conversations, but never spoken aloud in the courtroom. The prosecution's witness list included a staggering number of high-profile figures, celebrities, executives, and influencers. People who had once partied with Combs, collaborated with him, or simply existed in his orbit, were reportedly terrified of being dragged into the mess. Some had already been named in lawsuits. Others were bracing themselves for the possibility that their connections to Combs might resurface in ways they couldn't control.
So according to our friends over at Us Magazine, Diddy, who remains in the Brooklyn Metropolitan Detention Center while he awaits trial, Us Weekly writes this. It says Sean Diddy Combs has filed a defamation lawsuit against one of his accusers, their attorney, and News Nation.
And the list of names that seemed to grow by the day. Among the most shocking was Kid Cudi, whose name surfaced in connection with an alleged incident where Combs had reportedly threatened to destroy his car during a turbulent period in his relationship with Cassie Ventura. Although Cudi has remained tight-lipped publicly, insiders say the rapper is deeply unsettled by the renewed attention. Then there's Michael B. Jordan, whose name appeared in the filing not as a direct participant, but as someone allegedly present at one of Combs' notorious parties. The actors team has been working overtime to scrub any trace association. But the whispers in Hollywood are deafening, and let's not forget Dawn Richard, a former member of the girl group Danny Kane, who filed her own accusations against Combs, claiming she witnessed firsthand the darker side of his influence while working under his label. Even more eyebrow-raising was the inclusion of EA in the witness pool, a name that lit up social media the moment it leaked. While Ye is not accused of any wrongdoing in this case, the fact that his connection to Combs could come up in court has sent shockwaves through their mule circles. Some speculate that West's name appears because of his attendance at several infamous parties hosted by Combs in the early 2000s, where questionable behavior allegedly took place. This revelation has left even West's most loyal supporters questioning just how much he might have seen, or worse, Ignore, meanwhile, other figures like Jennifer Lopez, who famously dated Combs during the early days of her career, have reportedly been contacted by investigators, though her team insists she has no involvement in the current case.
That he had video footage. He also claimed to have the real Kim Porter memoir.
Perhaps the most unexpected name to emerge was Mariah Carey, whose connection to Combs dates back decades. While there's no suggestion she was involved in any alleged wrongdoing, her history of collaborating with Combs has made her a person of interest for investigators piecing together the extent of his influence and relationships. Insiders claim Carr's camp has been on high alert, working to distance her from the scandal while maintaining that her interactions with Combs were strictly professional. Still, the mere mention of her name in the context of the trial has sparked renewed scrutiny of the music industry's tight-knit web of relationships and the complicity that might lurk beneath the surface. One of the most shocking revelations came from a leaked court filing that hinted at possible involvement from a major music executive who had been a long-time collaborator with Combs, while no charges had been filed against this individual. The mere suggestion of their involvement sent ripples through the industry. Could they have known? Did they enable him? Or were they simply another pawn in a much larger game? The questions hung heavy in the air, unanswered, but impossible to ignore.
The paperwork claimed that Burgess and Mitchell fabricated, quote, outrageous lies against Diddy so that they could, quote, gain social media fame, enrich themselves, and strip Mr. Combs of his reputation, livelihood, and right to a fair trial.
Meanwhile, the entertainment industry itself was feeling the strain. For decades, Combs have been a towering figure not just in music, but in fashion, spirits, and cultural influence. He wasn't just a mogul, he was an institution. And now that institution was crumbling behind closed doors. Industry leaders were scrambling to distance themselves from the scandal. Brands that had once been eager to slap Combs' name on their products were now quietly scrubbing him from their promotional materials. Partnerships were being dissolved, deals were being restructured, and the name Diddy was becoming a liability. But it wasn't just about the business. The ripple effects of the trial were forcing a reckoning within the hip-hop community itself. For years, the industry had thrived on a culture of excess, of pushing boundaries, of celebrating larger-than-life personas. But now that same culture was under a microscope. Critics were quick to point out that Combs wasn't the first powerful figure in the industry to face allegations of misconduct. He was simply the latest in a long line. And as his trial unfolded, it was becoming increasingly clear that the industry's culture of silence and protecting its own was no longer sustainable. Yet for all the public posturing, there was an undeniable undercurrent of fear. What if this trial was just the beginning? What if the prosecution's case against Combs opened the floodgates for more allegations? More lawsuits, more revelations. Industry insiders were reportedly bracing for a domino effect, a chain reaction that could expose even more dark secrets lurking in the shadows. And for some, that fear was enough to reconsider their allegiances.
What you want you want the best attorneys you can have in there, and it really, I know you want to, like we said, appearances matter, but you want to win this case, and you need, like you said, it's harder.
The fear wasn't limited to the entertainment world. Even outside of Hollywood, the trial was raising uncomfortable questions about power and privilege. How had Combs managed to operate for so long without consequence? How many people had turned a blind eye? And why the answers weren't just about one man. They were about an entire system that seemed designed to protect the powerful at all costs. But for all the fear, there was also anger from the alleged victims, from their families, from advocates who saw this trial as a rare opportunity for accountability. The courtroom wasn't just a stage for legal arguments. It was a battleground for something much bigger. And as the trial continued, the stakes only grew higher. By the time the prosecution called its first witnesses' attention in the courtroom was almost unbearable. Every testimony, every piece of evidence felt like a bombshell. And yet for all the drama, there was an undeniable sense that the story was far from over. The trial was just one chapter in a much larger narrative, a narrative that was still unfolding in real time. And now we want to hear from you. Do you think this trial will finally bring accountability to an industry that's often been shielded by fame and fortune? Or is this just another high-profile case that will fade away once the cameras stop rolling? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And as always, stay tuned, because this story is only getting started.